in this video, I'd like to share with you an important tip that no amount of AI will advise you during job interviews. And the idea is the following. Going into job interviews, most candidates would prepare something for the occasion. You don't have to prepare an entire story bank, but if you only prepared a few answers to the most commonly asked questions, you'll notice that some answers will sound great while others will, sound so-so, right? And basically, if you're spending a significant amount of time on giving an answer that you're not confident about during a job interview, my advice would be to seriously consider ditching that story entirely ideally from your story bank, so to speak. So basically what I'm telling you here, what I'm suggesting you here, in the same way you would prepare a story stack, a story bank, a list of answers that you might want to employ in your job interview, also to prepare a ban list. In other words, things you should never talk about in your job interview. Now, what are some examples of these types of stories? The most common of them would be conflicts. Okay, so if you had conflicts that you cannot get over with in your previous roles, then you should simply stay away from sharing those conflicts in your upcoming job interview. And it's actually far more common than most candidates realize, So I've had people with whom I spent hours trying to help them to sell themselves on that conflict. It never worked, so the conclusion was you'd better ditch that experience going into a job interview. Or another very common scenario would be people get laid off, right? And then when you go into a job interview, they ask you, hey, but why are you leaving your previous role? If you got laid off because you made a mistake, when answering this interview question might not be to your advantage to talk about how you made a mistake there, and this was the root cause for you getting laid off. Yes, there's candidates who can be upfront and can even sell themselves on these things, but most people would never be able to spin it in such a way that would play to your advantage. You would rather speak it in a more negative tone. Hey, you know what, I got laid off. It was also a little bit my fault, but it was not entirely my fault, and this was get basically into an answer that will not be to your advantage, so to speak. And if this would be the case, my advice would be to remove the part of, hey, it was my fault, that part of the story, because it doesn't help you. Okay, you'd better focus specifically on this interview question. You answer specifically why you and why now. Why would you be a great fit for the role that you're applying for? Forward looking rather than backwards, negative type of thinking. So believe it or not, negativism shows in job interviews is actually exacerbated by the fact that it's a stress test, right? So you would want to keep only the positive stories in your story bank, right? And basically my last scenario, the third scenario I wanted to share with you here, would be a bad program or a bad service or a bad software, a bad algorithm, some achievement that went the wrong way. Okay, so there are types of failures that you would want to stay away from sharing in the job interviews. Like I just mentioned, if you got laid off because you made some monumental mistake, it's not worth sharing for most candidates for the purpose of a job interview. So basically, how do you want to qualify on whether you should talk about that failure or not? It depends on the learnings. So if you had some amazing learnings from a failure, then yes, it's something great to consider talking about in job interviews, right? When it's not, then you should simply skip it. And what do I mean by skipping it? I mean to go as far as to remove those experiences from your CV entirely. Like don't give them a reason to start a conversation on a topic that's not to your advantage, right? Furthermore, during job interviews, you'd think that, hey, you know what, I made a mental note that I will not talk about that type of shortcoming during the job interview. Well, actually, in my experience, what happens in some interviews is that there's this technique called the open up technique, where interviewers would make you feel so comfortable They would ask you questions you'll enjoy answering. For example, what makes you smile these days? Right? A question you'll enjoy answering, with whatever random answer. And then they would subtly spin it, with an uncomfortable question. Have you had any shortcomings maybe as of recently? And then people would spill the beans with these things, which, what, I got laid off because I made some monumental mistake. And you would basically complain rather than sell yourself as the better candidate for the purpose of a job interview. So long story short, in the same way that you would store, your best stories for the job interview, also consider having a ban list, stories that you would never want to share with them during job interviews. So I hope you found this useful, and thank you very much for watching.